Recently, I started asking myself why I haven't found a black violin pedagogue while researching these teacher lineages. For sure, it's not because there haven't been famous black violinists. I mean, there was George Bridgetower, who taught violin and piano in London for decades and premiered what was to be named the Kreutzer Sonata, even though Kreutzer refused to play it. Another was Joseph Boulogne, the Franco-Guadeloupean virtuoso who performed for Marie Antoinette at Versailles, and by some accounts, taught her as well. So both were celebrated performers who also taught, but apparently not enough to appear in my lineage charts. Turns out, though, that another name came up while I was working on Martin-Pierre Marsic. Marsic, if you remember from his video, taught Flèche, Thibault, and Enescu. You see, when Marsic's touring took him away from the Conservatoire de Paris, someone had to cover his class. That someone was a Franco-Cuban violinist named José Silvestre de los Dolores White Lafitte. He came to Paris in 1855 to study with Jean-Delphin Allard, adopting the French form of his name, Joseph White. So Joseph White was born in Matanzas, Cuba, in 1835, the son of Maria Estolastica Lafitte, a free Afro-Cuban woman, and Carlos White, a merchant and amateur violinist who put the first instrument in his hands and gave him his first lessons. He later studied with the Afro-Cuban violinist José Miguel Roman and with the Belgian musician Pedro Le Cerf. His public debut came in 1854 at the Théâtre Principal in Matanzas, sharing the platform with the touring pianist Luis Moreau-Gottschalk, who was struck enough by the young player to push him towards Paris. He helped him raise the money needed to get him there, and in 1855, White entered the Conservatoire de Paris in the studio of Allard. Stunningly, he received the Conservatoire's Premier Prix in violin a year later. The early 1860s marked his evolution from student to teacher as he began substituting for Allard during his absences. It was his first foothold inside the Conservatoire as a pedagogue rather than a pupil, and it happened alongside his most productive years as a composer. His pedagogical footprint became permanent in 1868 when his 6 etudes, opus 13, were taken into the official Conservatoire course of study. He became a French citizen in 1870, which cemented the Parisian part of his life. Amazingly, White made New York his base for an 11-month tour in the U.S., and in that stretch, he gave at least 33 performances across Manhattan, Brooklyn, Staten Island, Philadelphia, and Boston. It was then that he became the first soloist of African descent to appear with the Philharmonic Society of New York, which is the direct ancestor of today's New York Philharmonic. From 1877 to 1889, his teaching moved to a different scale entirely. He directed the Imperial Conservatory in Rio de Janeiro and served as court musician to Emperor Pedro II. When he returned to Paris in 1889, he was chosen to substitute for Martin-Pierre Marsic when his international tours took him away from the Conservatoire. When I contrast this with what was happening to blacks in the U.S. in exactly those years, it becomes even more striking. In 1896, the Supreme Court's Plessy versus Ferguson decision gave segregation its legal blessing, with Jim Crow being the law of the land. And in that very same stretch of time in France, Joseph White was entrusted to cover the classes of professors at the Conservatoire de Paris. This was not because France was some kind of colorblind meritocracy. I mean, it simply wasn't, as it was a nation with a colonial empire built on slavery. That said, a black violinist was teaching at the very top of a French musical institution, and because he was covering for Marsic, he taught students like Enescu and Thibault. So this all started out by me questioning why I'd never found a black pedagogue while researching teacher lineages. But Joseph White was there the whole time, hiding in plain sight. How many others might be out there, hiding as well?